So much, Rachel. So as you heard, I am Elizabeth Goizueta. I'm the curator of the McMullen Museum of Art's Mariano exhibition, Variations on a Theme. And as you can tell, I have my own gallo here. It's not a Mariano. If you want to see the Mariano gallos, you must go to the McMullen. But this is painted by a local painter. This is Mario Torroella, who is Cuban. And he's an artist and an architect. And it's just another example of lo cubano. So this Cuban, the essence of Cubanness that we are trying to bring out. And you can see that it's a very popular motif for Cuban painters. So I'm here today to talk with Dr. Carol Damian. I'm delighted to introduce her. She is an art historian, former professor of art history in the School of Art and Art History, and former director and chief curator of the Patricia and Phillip Frost Art Museum at Florida International University. She's a hometown girl. She's a graduate of Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. So shout out to Massachusetts there, and received her MA in Pre-Columbian art and her PhD in Latin American history from the University of Miami. A specialist in Latin American and Caribbean art, her most recent work has focused on Latin American women and Cuban exile artists, on whom she has written many catalogs and articles. Dr. Damian has contributed numerous publications and lectures, frequently on Latin America and Caribbean art, and the local art scene where she's recognized for her knowledge and experience. Dr. Damian has curated many notable exhibitions, and presently she is the curator of the J.I. Kislak Collection at the Freedom Tower and the Chapel of La Merced Colonial Collection at Corpus Christi in Miami. So Carol, we are so thrilled to have you. And I think what I'll do now is I'll just give a brief overview of your lecture so that people know what to expect. And I personally think that this is going to be a fascinating discussion. We will have a Q&A at the end. So I will ask for you to put your just put your questions in the chat, and then at the end, I'll read them off and we will have a robust discussion, I'm sure. So the theme for today is Mariano, the woman and the rooster. So I'm very excited for this, Carol. Mariano has long been the painter of roosters, and his work identified with the creature as a symbol of Cuba, the countryside, and male virility. Mariano's roosters are colorful, loud, arrogant, and bold beyond their size as they announce their presence with each strut and cock of their heads. However, Mariano is far more than the painter of roosters and the rooster, only one aspect of a far more complex symbolism. The McMullen Museum welcomes scholar of Latin America and Caribbean art, Carol Damian, for a virtual lecture that explores the rooster as the voice of nature and nature as woman in Mariano's work. Like the rooster, Mariano's paintings of women are part of a narrative informed by the relationships between man, woman, and the natural world. Images of women appear throughout Mariano's career, often overshadowed by the artist roosters, and are a meaningful presence to be discussed. And so without further ado, I turn this over to Dr. Carol Damian. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you. I'm going to see if this works. Yes.
Wow.
Wow. It worked. Thank you very much. Thank you to the McMullen Museum of Art for inviting me to present today and to participate in the programming for this wonderful exhibit of Mariano's work. Thank you to Elizabeth for her masterful curating and catalog essay, and to Rachel Chamberlain for assisting with the technology and the logistics, very important. I am in Miami, not on the beach. So, as you might think, I'm on the beach, but I'm not. And I'm grateful to the local collectors for their support in supplying images, and especially to Ramon Cernuda, who invited me to use his very comprehensive library and was a valuable consultant to my research. We do have a lot of beautiful roosters roaming the streets of Miami. Different colors, iridescent, simple grays and whites. I have been paying more attention to them these days instead of being annoyed when they refuse to move from my parking space in Alapata, where I work. You will see a favorite later. I can understand the fascination for the brazen bird and for Mariano's interesting challenge as he places the bird and the woman in competition in these wonderful uh, images and the paintings in the exhibit. So here are just some brief highlights of his career, because I think it's really interesting to know what his background is. As you can see, although he showed a very early interest in drawing and painting, he basically was self-taught. He went to the Escuela Nacional de Bellas Artes San Alejandro, but very briefly. It was perhaps the trip to Mexico when he was 24 years of age and met painter Rodriguez Lozano, who assisted him in his early development, that we really begin to see his career take flight. Mexican muralists were very influential to him. He worked with Diego Rivera and the muralists. In 1937, he was appointed assistant professor of murals at the Escuela Libre de Pintura y Escultura in Havana. In 1939, he was the founder of the Escuela de Plata with Porto Carrera and Lezama Lima. In 1944, he became a member of the Grupo Orígenes, a founder and member of a number of groups of art, literature, and culture. And I'm putting all this sort of text-heavy material on the screen. There's much more to talk about with him. He was the cultural attaché of the Cuban embassy in India, and a founding member of very important organizations. And I want you to know this, because I think too often people hear Mariano and they think of roosters, and he paints these big colorful roosters, but he was so much more than that. So in this presentation, I hope to show you that during his very full life and career, you can see he was born in 1912 and he passed in 1990. And that's a long career, that he accomplished a lot. His drawing skills, his painting skills, his mural skills were really significant to the development of his art. So I hope this presentation brings respect for this art and is also kind of fun. So let's let the rooster be our guide. I think of Mariano as a painter's painter. And I do that because, as you can see from the wonderful catalog, he goes through several phases. It was in the decade of the 30s that he began to develop his skills. In the 40s, the themes that become part of his entire career emerged: roosters, women, fruits, the guajiro, but always color was very defining to his technique and process. Even when the color gets dark, it's still a part of how he paints. By the 50s, he began to explore modern styles: abstraction, cubism, fauvism, expressionism, and you will see that emerge in his work. In the 60s, especially 1965, there's a major change to a darker, more grotesque painterly style. In the 70s and 80s, his late works are very diverse. Sometimes they become quite simplified and other times not. So it's quite extraordinary to see the breadth of production during his career. Okay, so we got to talk about the rooster. He has long been the painter of roosters, dueño de gallos, as Elizabeth said, beginning in 1941, and perhaps unfortunately, because the rooster has become so dominant. So who is this rooster? Why is he so popular and famous? He is the symbol of Cuba, the countryside, and male virility. Perhaps it's his alter ego, perhaps everything a man wants to be. It's a symbol of pride, of courage, and domination. It is colorful, loud, arrogant, and bold beyond its size as it announces its presence with each stroke and cock of its head. However, Mariano himself described the rooster as an opportunity for plastic experimentation, an image that lent itself to abstraction, color movement, a reality that could be near or far from the truth. The rooster which is above all iridescent, changing with the light, meant for him something so beloved that at every stage of his life and at every important moment of his visions, he has painted a rooster. So the one that I have on the screen now, El Gallo Blanco, from 1968 is, it's late 1968. He started doing this in the 40s, and he continues throughout his career to paint the rooster. So in this particular one, once again, you can see the color, the way he works with color. By the 60s, his style becomes more and more spontaneous and less exacting and realistic. The rooster is an excuse for him to paint. Why the rooster? Mariano himself said, "The issue is not the important thing. It is resolved in the plastic art. I didn't look for this because I liked it, but because he came to me tied up in drawing, because muralism demanded and the drawing was important to the background. In the development of this theme, I have set to analyze my expressive sensibility. It guarantees my changes in the plastic is when I ventured towards abstract expressionism or to notice of something else moved me." So the rooster is an excuse to paint. It is, as I said, he's a painter's painter because he's always concerned, always dedicated with the paint on the canvas, on the paper, in the case of the murals, on the walls, and how he can use paint to develop these plastic forms and bring them to life. So in this particular one, Rooster and Flowers, which is 1982. So you see, he's still painting roosters very late in his career. And once again, it is very spontaneous. One thing I also like about looking at so many of Mariano's works recently is that he has a wonderful facility with working with washes, with very wonderful drawing. He's an excellent draftsman. And then on top of the drawing, he does these washes of color that bring a certain dynamic to everything that he paints. So the question is always asked, how can I get rid of this over here? Hide the thumb. Okay, it's cutting off my screen. Okay. I'm often asked, how did this work sell for so much money? So there it is. This is the one that sold in New York in 2016 for the record of $1,087,500. That's a lot of money. And it became, after that auction, there's no doubt that it became very much of a topic of conversation. I know it did in Miami. So I said, Mariano's rooster sold for this amount of money. Well, the rooster is not only Mariano's rooster, but the rooster is a very important bird, maybe an animal. Let's call him an animal. He was already sacred to the ancients. He was a privileged singer of our fields, a symbol par excellence of virile commitment and reckless courage. In Greece, he was the protector of the arts and sciences. So the rooster has very strong symbolism, deeply connected to prosperity. It's found on coins. For centuries, it has been associated with good fortune, a Chinese zodiac sign, a Roman symbol of Mercury, the messenger. The Greeks connected it to the sun and the dawn. Remember, it crows when the sun comes up at dawn. So I pulled a couple of small images here just to show you some of the ancient symbolic images of the rooster, from the Chinese year of the rooster through Roman mosaics, a Roman coin, a Greek calyx, and a Greek plate that shows a youth riding the rooster. And this idea of riding the rooster this is when the sun is coming up. So you're going into the light. So he's a very important animal. He isn't just a pretty pest on the streets of Little Havana, which somebody might say, well, he's just, strutting around the streets, and what does he do for us? But he has symbolic associations. So here in another image, El Gallo from 1941, that is at MoMA, I see it as this ultimate image of the proud rooster guarding his territory. Is he Mariano's alter ego? There are other associations with the image of the rooster in Cuba. Osain in Santeria is the Yoruba orisha of wild plants, healing and magic. He is a powerful wizard. He needs a partner. The female counterpart is Oshun, the seductive orisha of love and marriage and fertility, and she rules the genitals and the lower abdomen. She's particularly associated with feminine beauty and, of course, fertility. Oshun is commonly called the river orisha or goddess in the Yoruba religion and is typically associated with water, purity, fertility, love, and sensuality. In most Yoruba stories, Oshun is generally depicted also as a protector, a savior, a nurturer. It's a perfect combination, right? The rooster and woman. The rooster needed a partner and the woman comes along. So let's move on to the woman and the rooster. Who is the woman? You will see in Mariano's work many, many images of women. She is portrayed in many different poses in many locations. She could be lo cubano. She could be in a Cuban interior as lo cubano, where you will see stained glass, iron details, the fancy chair, the patterns on patterns for the Baroque effects. Here she is lovingly holding the rooster. Is the rooster her pet? So this image of the woman with the rooster is a bold image of the rooster's presence, in this case in the interior, or perhaps even sitting on a balcony, but he is with her. She is holding him, controlling him. So who were the women in his life? He was handsome, charming, a ladies' man, I guess. 3 wives, that tells us something. His first wife was Libertad Baiz, Libby. They had a daughter, Lolita, and there's a photograph on the screen of them, the family together in those early years, 1941. Then he had another wife, Celeste Aloma. They had a son, Alejandro. And then he had a third wife, Flor Ceballos. So he loves his women, right? Celeste was his second wife. And I think this is a really nice image of Celeste from 1956, because here you can see how the style changes in the 50s as the background becomes much more abstract, her body and her clothes. Yet her face is quite natural and lovely. He does not distort her, just the background. Women are one of the most important themes. And as I said, the styles change throughout the years. I'm going to go a little bit chronologically, thematically and chronologically combined, because my focus is to look at women and their symbols and how they become symbolic, and also to put them within the context of his career. Also to discuss in terms of the avant-garde and modernism in Cuba. Mariano was a member of the second generation of the avant-garde. So like the first generation, the second generation also made an effort to change from the conservative academics of the past to meet the present. Cubism, Fauvism, abstraction, expressionism, they became aware that this was what was going on in Europe, and this was the way to bring Cuban art into the modern world. So it was a period, the first half of the century, of real experimentation and exploration. So for Mariano, as I said, he's a master draftsman, and that's very basic to his ability to explore all these other things. Those of us in the arts as teachers and lovers of art know that an artist has to be able to draw. It is so basic to what they do. That's the academic process. And it is with the basics of drawing that the artist is able to really enhance what he or she wants to do, because there's a firm foundation underneath. So Mariano does all of that. he can draw, he can work in a number of different media. But as we're going to see with these images of the woman, Cuba is his inspiration, the land, the people, the culture, traditions, and not Europe. We're not going to see images that are European images as he portrays his women, although we may see that other styles have influenced him throughout his career, like Mexican muralism. And I think you can see that here. Here's some examples of his drawing skills. He worked in drawings, prints, watercolors, and then the washes that are really so wonderful and give such energy to everything that he does. His favorite female subjects throughout his career, and there are many of them: peasants, portraits, domestic life, Eve, the Virgin Mary, mythological, ancestral, adventurous, maternal, the woman connected to birth and the origin of the world, creation. She's sensual, she's voluptuous, she's emotional. And the image on the screen of the two women, mujeres from 1940, I think really demonstrates that and how he feels about these sensually beautiful women. We're going to see women in nature. They're on the land, they're with the rooster, they're with fish, with birds, with fruit, and with flowers. So my point really is that there's much more complex symbolism than meets the eye when we look at the rooster and the woman, and especially the rooster and the woman. The rooster is the voice of nature, and nature is woman. The image of woman appears often, but is often overshadowed by the artist's roosters in the market, in the art market. She is closely associated with the land. Even when interior and exterior scenes appear, there is something that is there as well. It might be a bird, it might be the rooster, it might be flowers, and it might be fruit, all of which have to play their role when it comes to fertility. And the woman and the rooster as a fertile pair. So the early works in the 1930s and the 1940s show the influence of Mexico. Here is La Paloma de la Paz, the Dove of Peace from 1940. And I think you can see these heavy, volumetric, bold figures. And we're going to see how this changes throughout his career through the women, through the images of women. So Mexico, the muralist style that so impressed him and influenced him, is bold. It's often quite flat, large, few details. On the left is Diego Rivera's Tortilla Makers from a mural from 1926. In the middle is his portrait of Libby, his first wife, from 1938. And on the right, Mujeres Luchando, the Women Fighting from 1939. And you can see how the Mexican muralism did affect what he did and how he did it. Very large people, large limbs, a large presence wherever in the women fighting. You also notice that they are in the landscape, and there's a little tree, like a cactus tree in the background, that is sprouting. And their feet are very much on the earth, on the ground. So these women they may be fighting, who knows what they're fighting over, but they're on the ground, they're on the land. So the world of women becomes very important to him. In Cuba, the time of Machista, he understood representation, domination, but he also saw the beauty of the women, their association with the land and the future. And also, when we note, in this example as well, educando or educating, the foot on the land, her body and her large foot, she is one with the land. She's planted there, just as the plants around her, and she's pointing at a blossom, like her daughter is a blossom. The daughter is her blossom. She has created that little girl. So it's very significant. The woman is the educator. The woman is the creative. She's a source of knowledge in the land, the sacred land of Cuba. And also remember, Mexico had similar ideas with the mural movement to show the people that they were part of the land. So here's another one from 1939 that shows this intimate relationship, man, woman, nature. The woman is in the center. The figures are very abundant. She holds the seeds in her hand, and nature seems to be smiling all around her. And of course, she's very buxom. So this is the fertility that she is bringing as the creator, as she is in the land. In the 1940s, the influence of modernism in the Paris school emerges in his work, where we see elements of cubism, abstraction, fauvism, Picasso, Cézanne, Matisse appear in much of his work. There's a clarity of contours and bold colors giving way now to a much looser palette. If you remember, let's see if I can go back. You see how the contours, the linear contours and profiles of these figures are very striking. Whereas here, it's loosened up considerably, and it's still about color. He's always about color, but the palette itself has been diversified. The way he works with the different tonalities of the reds, the yellows in this particular image called the fishbowl. But ever present is Lo Cubano in the Tres Mujeres, Las Compadres patio in Cera. The three women, the three friends, are shown again in this very Cuban environment where important subjects for him emerge always. Friends and family, interior, exterior, a celebration of the land, daily activities, women close to the land and inside, and the decorative details that repeat themselves that are so representative of Cuban architecture and what we describe as Cuban Baroque. Fruits, not only Cuban fruits, but fruits associated with nature and fertility, especially bananas. We see a lot of bananas in his work. And of course, that's a symbol of, that's the male symbol of fertility. So whether the fruits are associated with the land or interior scenes, the fruits are present. Here, the figuration has become more distorted. This is from 1943, almost cubist, not quite, but almost cubist, but the color, the bright, wonderful colors are more fauve and expressionistic than Cuba. So he likes playing with still lifes. He likes playing with fruit, as we're going to see in a few minutes, because as with all artists, they see the still life as an opportunity to experiment with form. So this quintessential sensuality that begins early for him is able to transcend the different stylistic categories of his work as he goes through the years. The drawings, again, wonderful examples of his drawing skills, the facility with spontaneous layers of color, very different from the bold paintings. These are both from the 1940s. And as I mentioned, when he's got the women, places the women in the interiors, he's got some aspect of nature with them. The one on the right is woman with bird in hand. The one on the left, three women in an interior with flowers. So even as they get increasingly more abstract and less defined, the presence of the woman and nature is the basis for what he is doing. Exploring different styles, using this bold coloration, bold figures, and how they are changed, often kind of distorted, but I like to say they're more expressive as you go through the years, and you go through the 40s where the influence of Paris modernism is present. So here in this Woman in the Interior from 1943, you can see, yes, she has become distorted, she has become abstracted, but also the very expressive use of color is akin to Matisse and the Fauves. Very expressive use of color that is not necessarily descriptive, but it is used to perhaps exaggerate with the presence of the form. So daily life, examples of daily life are also important. These are two versions from 1949 where you see another change from the bold to the expressive, to the abstract and expressive use of color. The palette changes. It's gotten more subdued, more grays enter the picture and will continue to enter the picture from the very bright reds and oranges and yellows. The bright reds and oranges and yellows are still there, but now they're part of a bigger picture. Same elements. One on the right is a bit more abstract, a bit brighter. And I note the banana leaves that seem very reminiscent to those of us who are familiar with the work of Wilfredo Lam. And of course, that is part of the flora of Cuba as well. So here is the woman, and she is beheading that chicken that is, that's an animal to be eaten, and she's sitting there very proudly taking control of it, and the environment around her in both of the images really they're hard to read. We cannot really tell what they are, but we can figure that she's sitting outside. There's a little bit of an element of maybe trees in the background to behead this chicken. I doubt that she's doing it in her living room. So, but once again, she's become really so involved with nature. Here's another one, A Woman in the Interior, where you see this distortion is more reminiscent of Picasso now because it's been flattened. We see multiple points of view, which is very cubist. And the rooster on the left, now in the interior, has been completely elongated and exaggerated, and seems to be taking on another life entirely in this interior scene with the woman, and with so many elements that are very, very reminiscent of what Picasso does. She's still beautiful. Here's another where the woman is with a fish. As I said, you see the women, but they're always associated with nature. Fauve color here. Very expressive brushwork, flat with abstract distortion, playing around with the background again. So he seems to like, in most cases, to leave the face of the woman easier to read than the backgrounds in which she exists. Often what we have to do is really think, what is this? What's going on around her, to even try to make out what is happening. I mean, it's titled The Woman with the Fish, and the fish is down there in the lower right-hand corner. He also did religious and mythological subjects starting in the 1940s. And sorry about that. I knew that was going to happen. So this is the Annunciation from 1947. And look at the influences here. You see a little bit of Matisse. You see a little bit of Cézanne, a little bit of Gauguin. He's really playing with all of these elements. As I said, I love to call him a painter's painter because he knows how to work with paint and to use it to the best expressive way, to really show the plastic forms through paintbrushes. This is, I mean, look at the strokes on the leg of the Virgin Mary, the Annunciation, and it's the leg is only defined by paint strokes. It isn't defined by exacting contours or reality, but he makes us feel the flesh, the volume through the application of paint. In 1958, he goes to Spain, and he fuses what he saw with his own approach. There's a wonderful chapter in the catalog that is written by Elizabeth about this particular period of time. But I'm only going to talk a little bit about it so as not to repeat what she said last week and what is in the catalog. But it's really interesting that he goes to Spain and the works get dark. And the influence of Goya is definitely there. There's a Baroque canon that is beginning in a dark way, not in the way of Lo Cubano. We think of Baroque, we think of over decorative, lots of things, lace and flowers and doilies and all sorts of patterns. This is a different kind of a Baroque. This is really the European Baroque that under the with the brush of Goya really does get very dark. So he begins to experiment with the Baroque, with the darkness in his palette. And then another thing happens to influence his work. In 1960, he goes to India as the Cuban embassy charge d'affaires, where he sees a completely different production of art and creativity. A new spirituality emerges. Saturated colors go from the dark to, well, sometimes they're dark, but they're very saturated. The woman becomes Eve, Susanna, the goddess, a symbol of desire, pleasure, fertility, the male gaze upon the nudes. So a change comes from the 1940s. The women here in the Three Graces, remember, they're ruling the world as creators through time. They're never innocent. They're looking at you. They don't care if you're looking at them. They're not there for the male gaze. They're there to look at you. So he plays with this idea, this kind of spirituality that he recognized and learned about in the trip to India, and he brought back with him to Cuba. So these darker chiaroscuros, the spirituality that appear in the 60s, especially in 1965, are a strange new expression of beauty for him. Yes, distortion, yes, objectification, maybe a little voyeurism, but as the women are no longer innocent, they are there proudly and they play a role, and he's always aware of it. It is at this time when we kind of ask, beauty, what is his idea of beauty? What is our idea of beauty? Remember, he loved beauty. He loved sensuality. He loved emotion, but always it's about painting and how his brushstrokes can be beautiful, no matter what the subject and no matter what we may think of them today. In the 60s and the 70s, he returns to a bolder, brighter palette. In this period, late into the 70s, women, nature, fruits and flowers, and of course the rooster, are again part of his artistic production. He loved to combine things. So now we see different